Captured by outlaws near the canyon, she saw a cowboy fight for her life and heart. She began her journey early in the morning when the sky was still soft with pale light and the air felt cool against her skin. She had planned this trip for weeks, believing it would be simple. It was not an adventure, not a bold escape, just a necessary journey she had to make. There were things waiting for her on the other side of the canyon: responsibility, unfinished promises, and a future she was trying to hold together. She was not careless by nature. She prepared carefully, packing what she needed and studying the route as best as she could. Still, no map truly explained how lonely the land would feel once she entered it. The canyon stretched wide and deep, its rocky walls standing like silent guards. The path grew narrower as she traveled, and the world around her became quiet in a way that made every sound feel louder. At first, she enjoyed the stillness. The wind moved gently through the rocks, and the sunlight painted long shadows across the ground. It felt peaceful, almost comforting. She reminded herself that many people had passed through this land before her and survived. She told herself there was nothing to fear, but peace can be misleading. As the hours passed, she noticed how far she had come without seeing another traveler. No horses, no wagons, no voices in the distance. The silence began to feel heavy instead of calm. She tried not to let her thoughts wander into worry, but the feeling in her chest slowly changed. It was not panic, just a quiet sense that she was very alone. She continued forward, trusting her plan. Turning back would mean delay, and delay would mean failure. She had already lost enough time in her life. This journey mattered more than she wanted to admit. When she first saw them, she did not understand what was happening. They appeared suddenly, as if the canyon itself had opened and released them. A small group of men stood ahead on the path, blocking the way. Their clothes were worn, their faces hard, shaped by sun and rough living. They did not greet her. They did not move aside. Her heart began to beat faster. She slowed, unsure whether to stop or continue. Every instinct told her something was wrong. She searched their faces for kindness or reason, but found none. One of them stepped forward, his eyes sharp and curious, as if he were measuring her value rather than seeing her as a person. She tried to speak calmly. She explained that she meant no trouble, that she was only passing through. Her voice sounded steady to her ears, but inside she felt her strength slipping. They listened without interest. The canyon, which had once seemed beautiful, now felt like a trap. The walls were too high, the path too narrow. There was nowhere to run without knowing the land better than they did. When they moved closer, fear finally reached her fully. It was not loud fear, not the kind that makes someone scream. It was deep and cold, settling in her stomach and spreading through her body. She realized then how quickly plans can fall apart, how thin the line is between safety and danger. She thought of home, of the reasons she had started this journey in the first place, of the people who believed she would return. She tried again to reason with them. She offered what little she had, hoping it would be enough to let her go. The men exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. For a brief moment she allowed herself to hope, but hope did not last. They took control of the situation without rushing, without anger. That calmness frightened her more than shouting would have. It told her they had done this before. It told her she was not their first mistake and likely would not be their last. As they led her deeper into the canyon, the light began to change. The sun dipped lower and shadows grew longer. Each step felt heavier than the last. She focused on breathing, on staying aware, on not letting fear take over completely. She reminded herself that panic would not help her survive. The outlaws spoke among themselves, sometimes laughing, sometimes arguing, but never including her. To them, she was a problem they had already solved. That thought hurt more than she expected. Being unseen, reduced to a situation rather than a human being, made the world feel smaller and crueler. She studied them quietly. She noticed who gave orders and who followed. She noticed which of them watched her closely and which ignored her. She listened to their voices, their movements, their habits. If there was one thing life had taught her, it was that awareness could be a form of strength. As the hours passed, Exhaustion began to mix with fear. Her body ached, but she forced herself to keep going. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Even if she felt powerless, she would not surrender her dignity. When they finally stopped near a hidden area of the canyon, the sky was turning dark. The air felt colder, and the silence returned, heavier than before. The place was rough and isolated, chosen clearly because few would ever wander there by accident. She realized then how carefully the outlaws had planned their lives around places like this, places forgotten by the rest of the world. As night settled in, she sat alone with her thoughts. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer controlled her completely. In its place was a quiet determination. She did not know how or when, but she believed this would not be the end of her story. She thought about strength, not the loud kind, not the kind that wins fights, but the kind that survives waiting, uncertainty, and darkness. The kind that holds on when there is no clear path forward. Somewhere beyond the canyon, the world continued as usual. People went about their lives, unaware of what had happened to her. That thought hurt, but it also reminded her of something important. Her life mattered even if no one was watching. She promised herself that if an opportunity appeared, she would take it. If help came, she would recognize it. And if it did not, she would still keep her mind sharp and her hope alive. The journey that was supposed to be simple had become something else entirely. It had stripped away comfort and certainty, leaving only truth behind. She had entered the canyon believing she was just passing through. Now, she understood she was being tested. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed felt longer than they truly were. Time moved slowly in the hidden part of the canyon where she was kept, as if the world itself had decided to pause. The sun rose and fell, but it did not bring comfort or change. Each morning came with the same questions, and each night ended with the same uncertainty. She learned quickly that fear could either weaken her or sharpen her mind. At first, it pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every sound made her tense. Every movement nearby pulled her attention. But as the hours passed, she understood that fear alone would not help her survive. She needed control over her thoughts, her reactions, and the small choices she could still make. The outlaws were different from one another, and she noticed this with careful eyes. One was loud and careless, often speaking without thinking. Another stayed quiet, watching everything from a distance. The one who seemed to lead them spoke less but carried authority in his posture. She paid attention to these details, knowing that understanding people was often the first step to protecting oneself. They did not speak to her unless necessary. When they did, their words were short and rough, as if kindness were a language they had forgotten. Still, she answered calmly, choosing each word with care. She knew that anger might provoke them and silence might be misunderstood. Balance was her shield. The place where they stayed was rough but hidden well. Rocks formed natural walls, and thick shadows filled the spaces between. It was clear they had chosen it because it was easy to defend and hard to find. The canyon echoed with distant sounds, making it impossible to tell what was near and what was far away. That confusion made escape feel impossible, but she refused to let that thought settle too deeply. During the quiet moments, she thought about her life before this. She remembered simple things, the feeling of clean water on her hands, the sound of familiar voices, the comfort of knowing where she belonged. These memories hurt, but they also reminded her of what she was fighting for. She was not just trying to survive the moment. She was trying to return to a life that still mattered. Hunger and tiredness became familiar companions. Meals were simple and uneven, given without care. She accepted them without complaint, understanding that pride could be dangerous. Strength, she realized, sometimes meant bending without breaking. At night, sleep came in pieces. She would drift off only to wake again, her body alert even when her mind wanted rest. The canyon felt different after dark. The air grew colder and the shadows seemed to move. In those moments, fear tried hardest to take control. She would close her eyes and focus on her breathing, reminding herself that she was still alive, still thinking, still capable. One evening, she noticed a change. The men returned from somewhere outside the canyon, their moods unsettled. Their voices were louder, their movements sharper. She listened closely, catching bits of conversation she could not fully understand. Something had gone wrong for them, perhaps a deal that failed or a risk that came too close to danger. Whatever it was, tension filled the air. That tension worried her. Uncertainty made people careless, and carelessness could turn cruel. She stayed quiet, drawing as little attention to herself as possible. At the same time, she observed more closely than ever. Moments like these often revealed weaknesses. She noticed that one of the men questioned the leader more than before. Another seemed nervous, pacing and looking toward the canyon opening again and again. These small signs told her something important. They were not as confident as they wanted to appear. This knowledge did not free her, but it gave her something just as valuable, hope rooted in reality, not dreams. She began to understand that survival was not a single brave act. It was made of many small choices: when to speak, when to stay silent, when to watch, and when to rest. Every decision mattered. One afternoon, while the sun stood high and the heat pressed down on the rocks, she was left alone for a short time. The men had moved away to talk among themselves. Her heart raced, but she did not move. She knew better than to act without a plan. Instead, she used the time to study her surroundings more carefully than ever before. She traced the edges of the rocks with her eyes, noticing paths that were hidden unless you knew where to look. She counted steps between shadows, memorizing the shape of the land. Even if she could not escape now, knowledge would prepare her for later. When the men returned, she lowered her gaze, returning to the role they expected her to play. Inside, however, her mind was active and focused. As another night arrived, she realized something had changed within her. She was still afraid, but fear no longer ruled her. In its place was determination, quiet, steady, and strong. She had not chosen this situation, but she could choose how she faced it. She reminded herself that endurance was not weakness. Waiting did not mean surrender. Sometimes the strongest action was simply staying alive long enough for the right moment to appear. Somewhere beyond the canyon, unknown to her, someone would soon learn what had happened. Someone who knew this land, who understood its dangers, and who would not turn away. But she did not know that yet. All she knew was this: she would not let the canyon break her spirit. Each day tested her patience. Each night tested her courage. And through it all, she held on to a quiet belief that even in the most isolated places, change was possible. This place of fear was not the end of her story. It was only the middle. Far from the hidden place in the canyon, life moved at its usual pace. The land stretched wide under the open sky, and the wind carried dust, stories, and quiet warnings for those who knew how to listen. He was one of those people, a cowboy shaped by long days, hard work, and a deep understanding of the land. The ground spoke to him in ways words never could, and on this particular day, something felt wrong. He noticed it first as a feeling, a slight shift in the air that did not match the calm sky. Horses in the area were restless. Birds lifted suddenly and flew away without reason. These signs did not go unnoticed by him. He had learned long ago to trust such signals because the land rarely lied. Later that day, while passing through a small settlement near the canyon's edge, he overheard broken pieces of conversation. A traveler mentioned seeing unfamiliar men near the canyon trail. Another spoke of a woman who had not arrived where she was expected. No one spoke loudly or clearly, but the fragments settled in his mind like stones in still water. He did not know her. He had never seen her face or heard her voice, yet something about the story stayed with him. Maybe it was the way people avoided eye contact when they spoke. Maybe it was the silence that followed, or maybe it was simply his nature. He had never been good at walking away when something felt unfinished. That night, as he sat alone under the stars, he thought about the canyon. He knew its paths, its dangers, and its hiding places. He also knew how easily someone unfamiliar with it could disappear. Sleep did not come easily. The quiet felt heavy, filled with unanswered questions. By morning, he had made his choice. He packed lightly and set out toward the canyon, following instinct more than reason. There was no reward waiting for him, no promise of gratitude. Only a sense that doing nothing would be harder to live with than facing whatever he might find. As he rode closer, he began to notice signs others would miss. A disturbed patch of ground, tracks that did not belong to wildlife, a trail that ended too suddenly. Each detail confirmed what his instincts had already told him: something had happened here. He moved carefully, respecting the land and the danger it could hide. The canyon was not kind to the careless. Sound traveled strangely there, and shadows could hide more than rocks. He slowed his pace, listening more than watching, letting the silence guide him. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then began its slow descent. Just as doubt tried to settle in his mind, he found something small but important. A piece of fabric caught on a sharp rock, worn but out of place. It was not proof, but it was enough. He knew then that turning back was no longer an option. As he followed the trail deeper into the canyon, he thought about the kind of people who used places like this to disappear. He had crossed paths with men like that before. They believed isolation protected them, that the land belonged to them because others feared it. They were wrong, but they did not know it yet. Meanwhile, she felt a change she could not explain. Nothing visible had happened. The men still moved as before, still guarded their space. Yet something in the air felt different. A quiet tension replaced their earlier confidence. She sensed it in the way they spoke, in how often they checked the canyon's edge. That night she heard something unfamiliar. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but it was not natural. Her heart began to beat faster. She stayed still, listening. The sound came again, soft, controlled, deliberate. Someone else was out there. She did not allow herself to hope too quickly. Hope could be dangerous. Still, she held onto the sound, storing it carefully in her mind. The cowboy moved closer with patience earned through years of survival. He watched from a distance, counting movements, studying patterns. He saw her before she saw him, sitting quietly, her posture tired but unbroken. The sight confirmed everything he needed to know. She was alive. That knowledge strengthened his resolve, but he did not rush. He understood that one wrong move could make things worse for her. He waited, choosing the moment when attention would be elsewhere. From where she sat, she noticed a shadow shift where it should not have. It was brief, but enough. Her breath caught in her chest. She did not turn her head, did not react outwardly. She had learned too well the cost of drawing attention. Instead, she stayed still, letting only her awareness change. For the first time since her capture, she felt something close to certainty. Someone was out there who did not belong to the men holding her. Someone who moved with purpose, not carelessness. As darkness settled, the tension grew thicker. The men argued quietly among themselves, frustration clear in their voices. They sensed the land turning against them, even if they did not understand why. Their control felt less firm, their confidence cracked. The cowboy waited for the right moment, knowing patience was his greatest strength. He had not come for glory or praise. He had come because walking away was not who he was. She sat in the shadows, her heart steady despite the storm inside her. Whatever happened next would change everything. She did not know his name or his face yet, but she knew one thing clearly. She was no longer alone. The canyon, once a place of fear, now held something else: possibility. And both of them, standing on opposite sides of danger, were about to step into the moment that would bind their stories together forever. Night settled over the canyon like a heavy blanket. The air grew cool, and the sounds of the day slowly faded. Shadows stretched across the rocks, hiding details and changing familiar shapes into something uncertain. This was the hour when the canyon felt most alive and most dangerous. The cowboy stayed still, watching. He had waited for this moment when darkness softened sharp edges and tired minds grew careless. He knew better than to rush. Every step had to be measured, every movement planned. One mistake could cost more than his own safety. He studied the men closely. They were restless now. The long days and uneasy nights had worn them down. Their voices carried frustration and their attention drifted more often than before. Control was slipping from their hands, even if they refused to admit it. She sensed the shift too. The tension around her felt different, less certain, more fragile. She sat quietly, her body still but her mind alert. Her heart beat fast, but she kept her breathing slow. She understood that this moment required calm, not fear. From where she sat, she could not see him clearly, but she felt his presence. It was not imagination. It was instinct. The same instinct that had helped her survive these days now told her that change was close. The cowboy moved when the moment finally opened. He used the land the way it had taught him, stepping where shadows fell deepest, letting the wind cover small sounds. The canyon, which had once felt like an enemy, now became his ally. He watched her carefully, waiting for the right chance to make himself known without drawing attention. He did not want to startle her or alert the others. When their eyes finally met, it happened quietly, without words. Just a brief look, steady, clear, and full of understanding. That look told her everything she needed to know. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply nodded once, almost invisibly. Trust formed in that single moment, not blind trust, but the kind born from shared danger. The men were distracted, arguing among themselves again. Their focus had turned inward, not outward. That was the opening he had waited for. The next moments passed quickly, yet felt endless. He acted with control, guiding rather than forcing, protecting rather than confronting whenever possible. The situation did not unfold like the stories people like to tell. There was no dramatic display, no perfect timing. It was tense, uncertain, and frightening. She followed his guidance without hesitation. Her body trembled, but her mind stayed sharp. Each step away from the place where she had been held felt unreal, as if the canyon itself might pull her back. At one point, a sound echoed too loudly against the rocks. She froze, fear flashing through her. The men turned, confused, searching the darkness. The cowboy reacted instantly, placing himself between her and danger, using the shadows to hide them both. They waited, barely breathing. Seconds stretched thin, then passed. The men, tired and frustrated, turned away again. The canyon swallowed the moment, returning to silence. Only then did she realize how close everything had come to falling apart. They moved again, slowly and carefully. Each step carried risk, but also hope. The farther they went, the lighter her chest felt. The weight she had carried since the first day began to loosen its grip. Finally, they reached a place where the canyon opened slightly, allowing the sky to stretch wider above them. The stars felt closer there, brighter, as if witnessing their escape. Only then did he speak, his voice low and calm. "You're safe now," he said, not as a promise, but as reassurance grounded in action. She did not answer right away. Words felt small compared to what she was feeling. Relief washed over her, followed by exhaustion so deep it made her knees weak. He noticed immediately and supported her without question. They paused there, allowing her a moment to breathe, to understand that the danger behind them was real, but so was her freedom. As they moved farther from the canyon's depths, she became aware of how much had changed inside her. Fear had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her. In its place was something steadier, strength shaped by survival. She looked at him then, really looked at him. He was quiet, focused, marked by the land and the life he lived. There was no pride in his expression, no expectation of gratitude. He had acted because he believed it was right. That realization touched her deeply. They did not speak much as they continued on. Words were not necessary. The silence between them felt different from the canyon's silence, lighter, filled with understanding instead of fear. When the first hint of morning appeared on the horizon, she felt tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the release of everything she had been holding inside. The night that had once felt endless was finally giving way to light. The canyon lay behind them now, quiet and distant. It would always be a part of her story, but it no longer defined her ending. As the sun began to rise, she knew one thing with certainty. She had survived something that could have broken her. And beside her walked someone who had risked everything, not for recognition, not for reward, but because he believed her life mattered. What came next was still unknown. The road ahead was uncertain and healing would take time. But for the first time since her journey had gone wrong, she felt hope without fear attached to it. The fight for her life had not been loud or heroic in the way stories often describe. It had been quiet, careful, and deeply human, and it had changed them both forever. Morning came slowly, as if the world itself needed time to adjust to what had happened. The sky softened from dark blue to pale gold, and the land around them began to show its true shape again. Rocks that once looked threatening now appeared quiet and still. The canyon, which had held so much fear, faded into the distance behind them. She walked beside him in silence, each step carrying her farther away from the days she never wanted to relive. Her body felt tired in a way she had never known before, but it was a clean kind of tiredness, the kind that comes after surviving something difficult. With every breath, she felt more present, more real. They stopped near a small stream where the land opened up and felt safer. The sound of flowing water was gentle and steady, and for the first time in days she felt calm enough to sit without fear. He offered her water and she accepted it slowly, letting the coolness remind her that she was truly free. For a while, neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary. The quiet between them was not empty, it was full of understanding. They had shared something intense, something that did not need explanation. Sometimes silence carried more truth than conversation ever could. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Thank you," she said. He nodded as if he had expected nothing else and needed nothing more. "You were strong," he replied simply. "You did most of the work yourself." They began the journey back toward familiar land. The path ahead was long, but it no longer felt frightening. With each mile, the weight inside her chest eased. The world began to feel larger again, filled with possibilities instead of limits. As they traveled, she noticed small things she had missed before: the way the light moved across the ground, the sound of wind through dry grass, the steady rhythm of walking forward. These simple details felt precious now, reminders of how easily they could be taken for granted. He guided the way, but he never rushed her. When she needed to rest, they rested. When she walked slowly, he matched her pace. There was respect in every choice he made, and she felt seen in a way she hadn't expected. Eventually, signs of life appeared. A distant trail, familiar marks left by travelers. The closer they came to safety, the more she realized how deeply the experience had changed her. She was not returning as the same person who had entered the canyon days before. She carried fear still, but it no longer defined her. It had become a reminder rather than a shadow. When they reached a place where others lived and traveled, she felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because she knew she would be safe now. Sadness because she understood that this chapter, intense and life-changing, was coming to an end. They stopped there, knowing this was where their paths would separate. She turned to him, unsure of what to say. There were so many things she could thank him for, so many questions she could ask. But some connections did not need long conversations to be real. "I won't forget this," she said honestly. He met her eyes, his expression calm and sincere. "You're not meant to forget," he replied. "You're meant to live after it." She continued forward toward hers, carrying both scars and strength. In the days that followed, she returned to the world she had nearly lost. Familiar faces welcomed her, and life slowly resumed its rhythm. Yet everything felt slightly different. Louder sounds startled her. Quiet moments felt deeper. She noticed emotions more clearly, both her own and those of others. Healing did not happen all at once. There were nights when memories returned uninvited, when the canyon felt close again. In those moments, she reminded herself of the choices she had made, the strength she had found, and the fact that she had survived. She began to speak about her experience, not to seek attention, but to release its hold on her. Each time she told part of the story, it lost a little of its power over her. What once felt like only fear slowly transformed into understanding. She learned to trust herself again. Sometimes she thought of the cowboy. She wondered where he was, what land he traveled, whether he remembered her too. She realized that love did not always need time or promises to be real. Sometimes it existed in a single act of courage, in the decision to stand up for another person when it mattered most. Her life moved forward. She took on responsibilities she once feared. She made decisions with more confidence, guided by the knowledge that she could face hardship and endure. The world no longer felt fragile in the same way. The canyon remained a part of her story, but it no longer defined her identity. It became a turning point, a place where fear met courage, and where she discovered the depth of her own resilience. Years later, she would still remember the quiet strength of the man who stepped into danger without hesitation. Not as a fantasy, not as a perfect hero, but as a real person who made a real choice. And she would remember herself, not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who survived, learned, and continued forward. Life did not become easier after that journey, but it became clearer. She understood now that even in the most isolated places, hope could find its way in. That courage did not always announce itself loudly. And that the human heart, when tested, could hold more strength than anyone ever expected. Her story did not end in the canyon. It began there.